does it feel to be so close with so many former students? Because all of these were former students of yours.
Christ, it is the greatest privilege I have got from fate. I have a list here of 150 former students, and that means 150 close friends whom I have followed in their country. It is like an extended family, and it was probably the greatest satisfaction to me to see how these boys and girls were struggling, and then some of them came up to the top, some of them didn't. This is life. But I felt that to teach the younger generation is at least as important for a scientist than as producing some valuable new information. Unless you can transfer that information, unless you can motivate the young generation, you are not fulfilling your complete.
Personal question. How did you manage to get all these students? How would you get so many, get so high?
Well, when I started, I got a very few students from the neighboring countries. Then I got a grant from the Swedish Medical Research Council, which enabled me to bring in 2 or 3 foreign students. And then came the Fourth Foundation, which they have heard about, that I am particularly interested in training. The young people said this is the place to go, because it's not only technology you learn, but a kind of a philosophy of science. And obviously science is very personal. And I established very personal relation to all these boys and girls. And even today, Christi, 40 years later, I get for Christmas cards from the old man in Argentina and whatnot, wishing me everything good. And so it is difficult to express it adequately, but I can tell you that it has enriched incredibly my life. It wasn't difficult, the atmosphere did it. It was very exciting for them to be suddenly in a truly international atmosphere. They have not had it before. In the lab there were almost a dozen nationalities or more, and they established close friendships which lasted a lifetime. And then I had an incredible luck by having technical assistance of very high quality. All this is, of course, it depends on personalities. And in order to get friends, you must be one of them. It's as simple as that. And so I was very good friend with my technicians. They were very devoted. They were teaching all these people. And when we got then the real mixed, because the first time there came highly qualified boys who spent a year or two at Harvard or at Columbia, mostly Americans, or in Belgium. So they were high standard. But then Ford Foundation wanted that we should train people from developing countries. And that was a big order. And there came these boys and girls, very enthusiastic, but very ignorant. And some of them has never kept in their hands a test tube. It was new for them. And so there was the girls in the lab, my technical assistants, who were teaching them, who were under the nickname of assisting. They were teaching them. This was the secret of the operation.
So it all started with the relationship you had with them? You started as friends, not as professor-student?
I tried to, but of course they come here and they have a very big respect from the beginning. They may come from a country where there is still the system of Herr Professorissimo, and they could understand that we have no such a thing, that this is an entirely different atmosphere. Here there are no big VIPs, but no one has more prestige than the evidence presented by him in a given field, on a given occasion. And if you keep this in mind, then it is very easy to sort out all the lightweight champions who are living for the prestige because they are uncertain of themselves. Or they are living for prestige because it is needed for their career. And it is easy to see, also in the young people when they came. I didn't need to tell them that they should work hard. They were working day and night. They were working like, sometimes I was worried about being 16, 17 hours in the lab.
Just trying to get the result,
That means that there is a lot of goodwill in the young when they are coming to you to learn. And it is extremely important for their future career, what kind of guy you are. Mm-hmm. That's what I have learned. If they get the proper environment, the proper scientific atmosphere, then they develop an enthusiasm, and that we lost very long time. Even when they get home under very difficult circumstances, where it is still the tyranny of the Herr Professor and the like. It exists, of course, everywhere, perhaps somewhat less in this country. Mm-hmm. It was very helpful that we could establish a free society.
Who were the first?
The very first was, I think there were two people from Finland. There was Lasse Sjöblom, that's in Finland. Sjöblom and Maija Lassila. And then they were joined by Eva Axelsson and Märta Halla. And then Herman Adlerkreutz, who then became the big professor in Helsinki. Lasse Sjöblom then wrote a thesis, meanwhile with me, and finished it back in Turku. And they have had, like here, it was a major exercise to get a doctor's degree. You work 3-4 years on your thesis, and so they invited me as the opponent of the faculty You know that there is an opponent of the faculty, and then there is an opponent nominated by the respondent. And here it was the old academic tradition. I was seated at the table here. The opponent, the respondent was seated at a table here, and in between the two of us sat the custos with a big sword. And this came from the tradition that in earlier times it was usually the discussion went into a fight, and so there was he with this big spade to separate those who wanted to fight. And it was a very nice thing, and my memories are that I have never had in my life such a glorious blackout. And so in the evening there was a big toast and beauty after everything was finished. And then next morning I was trying to get somewhat sober. Comes the telephone from the professor Egon, who was his chief. Where in hell are you? Where in hell in bed? Come at once to my house. We are waiting for you. So they were waiting for me with a cognac session. And from then on, it went like that, you know, and terrible. And the cognac session was continued by a very wet luncheon, and from the luncheon we went to dinner, and by that time, so it was the real Finnish way. And then I complained about headache. And Adlerkreuz said, headache? You should have some zakushka. Zakushka is a kind of a special sandwich in Russia.
Yes, we have it in Romania.
You have it?
Not a sandwich, it's a mix of vegetables.
No.
That's different.
The zakushka.
It's the same pronunciation, zakuska. It's in Romania.
No, the zakushka I learned later was when you are absolutely down because of the alcohol and you need a pick-up. Then you take a slice of lemon, put on this freshly grown coffee, thick mass, and put all this into your mouth against the palate, and drink some aquavit through it. And the effect is incredible. It is the zakushka. Look, human nature is human nature. And among 150 guys, it is bound to happen that some of them feel a genetic attraction and others don't. And some of them become very good friends, and others less so. But, and of course, I was always concerned that there will be conflicts between the different nationalities in the lab. There was a very good spirit, and Africans and South Americans, no problem. And the only problem I had with the Canadians, because there were two Canadians, one from Toronto, a British Canadian, and the other from Montreal, so that was Dick Wilson and Eddie Boltier, who was French from Montreal. And of course, everybody was in very good friendship, but these two were always discussing who is more impossible than the other. And finally one day there was a big conflict when Cristian said, but you see, our queen decided that I am not interested in your queens. And there was a big row. So there I had to say, boys, take it easy. Even we have here a king and we don't bother about it.
So I think it was a real pleasure to work with these guys, with all of them. It was a real pleasure to go to work because it was a friendly environment.
Yes, and it was a lot of headache at the same time, because the headache that they come with a maximum of expectation that they will get something from here, that there will be a publication when they go home, and you can never guarantee. And it was always anxiety and problems that did I give them the proper project. To most of them I did. In a few cases it was a failure. And when it was a failure, it hit me very hard, because it affected so much their future career. Our routine was that when new fellows came, we invited them to the house. And when they left, we invited them to the house with their wives. But we couldn't do much more for the wives. And they had a really tough time in a foreign environment. The man is working, and so what we tried to do to entice most of the wives to work with their husbands. And sometimes it was a glowing success, sometimes it didn't work out. For instance, Nini Mancuso came as a bachelor, like Pino Benoggiano as a bachelor. Then Nini went home to Sicily, and the family told him, now you get married to Franca. So Nini came with Franca. And Franca was a very nice girl, and Franca, we had to find some occupational therapy for Franca. So she came to the lab, and we have had countercurrent distribution at the time, very primitive machinery, but others didn't. And you could shake those tubes and get separations and what. And Franca was so little that we had to make a pedestal for her that she should be able to shake it, but she did. And I wrote first Jonas, who is now in retirement, the gynecologist, from the first marriage of my wife, and brought him to the laboratory. And then Ulf became interested, and then I sent him to Palo Alto, there had some friends of the Syntex Corporation, which is no longer. And it was very useful because he learned some American English, got friends, worked in the lab, and he was there, I think, half a year, and that was very useful. And Boo, the younger boy, he started from the beginning reading French. And then I had a friend in Paris, Professor Sakis, at company Roussel, and he invited Boo to spend the summer in their laboratories. And that was extremely helpful. He got into the French and decided that he will specialize on French. So that I can only say that whenever there is a chance, try to use it, because it means so much for the children, that they have had an early exposure to another country, to other people, and to understand that life is not moving around a small place like the city they live in.
How would you describe the friends you have made in the laboratory among the young scientists that worked with you?
They were different, like people are different. But it was extremely rarely the case that I got disappointed, because the good intention was coming up on the surface of whatever it was the case. And they have realized what I told them, but I didn't realize myself, that how very true. That I said, boys, this is the happiest time of your life, because you are here and you have no major concerns, because those are the concerns of ours. As soon as you go back to real life, you will find that you are no longer in a protected atmosphere, but you are exposed to competition, to double crossing and whatnot. So enjoy the protected atmosphere here, make friends with the others, and try to see the permanent value of trying to achieve something for the benefit of the race. And it usually had an impact. I have not the foggiest idea, except one thing. It is, like the story of the two mirrors situated side by side. And in one of the mirrors you view yourself, in the other, others view you. And the distance between the two is usually significant, and sometimes very significant. Some were more free-spoken than others. And like Pino Benaciano, they described me and they said, it worked like this. He said, write a draft. Yes. I wrote a draft. He picked it into pieces, rewrote it completely, gave it back, try it again. I tried it again, and it was the same procedure. And we were going through 6 or 7 times this procedure until we arrived to the original version of the paper. So this is how he described me. So it was a perfectionist who wanted that every word has a meaning, and I tried to impress upon them that it's very important that you use the proper word for the proper thing, and you don't use a loose language, because then you are not a very good scientist. A scientist is a scientist, and very often he has a one-tracked mind, which means that as a human being you discover that there are major shortcomings, but there is something which he can see, you don't. That's the genius.
Who were the one that inspired you?
My first professor in Hungary was Georg Ivanovich, who was a young professor in pathology and bacteriology. Think of a violinist. He has a teacher, always a good teacher somewhere. And so nobody is a self-made man, but sometimes the input of the older generation is more difficult to see, and it varies, of course, a great deal from individual to individual. Line goes between those who question and those who accept.
Mm-hmm. So one of the qualities that a scientist always has to have is to raise a question.
To question. Do I know this correctly? Is that really so? Are there other explanations? And there always are other explanations. And as who was it? One of my teachers who said, I measure the intelligence of a student by the number of explanations he can find to explain a given fact.
About a scientist, what qualities do you think a scientist should have in order to become a good scientist?
The best definition comes from Claude Bernard. And he says, a scientist should have a robust faith, but still shouldn't believe. That's what is needed to believe that it is possible for a scientist to get new information, but at the same time be careful not to overinterpret what you find. So a scientist should be aware of his and the others' limitations. Scientists should be aware that there is no such thing as the ultimate truth. There are only half-truths in life, but there are quite a few, and it is important to know them. But scientists should know that he needs more than anything else good luck. And sometimes you will find something. And I give you two examples. One of the professors I knew in Oxford, I think. And the young boy came in and said, Professor, I would need advice. I would need a subject. What should I do? Everything has been searched, and then it's very difficult to find something new. And the professor said, there is there a big book. You see that? It is the history of medicine. Please bring it here. And then bring me a knife, please. Give him, put the knife in somewhere. Open any page. And you will find that that is the subject, which is well established, and therefore you should go ahead and do research on it, because it is not so well established as you think. So, this is not a bad advice. You may do anything and everything. I found out with my students that the selection of a research topic is not a rational process. It is an emotional process. And therefore you should respect it. And he will tell you what he would like to do. And let him do it. And don't try to persuade, yes, but. Of course, the limitation is that you can give a better guidance if he's doing something where you have some experience. And if he wants to do something entirely different, maybe he will be better off if he will go to another. But to develop the philosophy of research, it is still an individual show. It is like the fabrication of a violin, a Stradivarius or an Amati. It is something which the individual can shape. And there are no textbooks and whatnot and formal courses. You have to find your own philosophy. And it is there if you... it is Bacon who said that, brother, life is full of wonders. If you have the eyes to see. So you need the attitude to see. And it is no hypocrisy when I go back and back again and say that modesty and humility are very essential prerequisites for any scientist. Otherwise, he is running a major danger of believing that he is an important person. Nobody is important.
Professor, how would you describe the scientific work, in the field of the scientific work, one of the major accomplishments, the fetal placental unit?
You may remember Winston Churchill, who said that the longer you can look backwards, the further you can look forward. So it is good to look back. And when I started working in the department with Professor Weston, it was not very long after that the first estrogens have been isolated and progesterone has been isolated by people whom I knew, like Willard Allen and Doisy and all the big names.
It is very interesting that I'm interrupting you right now, because we read in the books about discovering progesterone, discovering estrogen, but for us that's something that, okay, but it happened centuries ago, it didn't happen now.
The first estrogen was isolated in 1936 by Doisy in St. Louis, and I visited Doisy and had a very animated conversation. Progesterone was isolated by Willard Allen in 1940, I think. And we became very good friends with Willard Allen, and I remember spending a night with him in his kitchen and discussing the theory of countercurrent distribution, which was then my own hobby. any rate, so the sex hormones were very much in the coming. And I became one of those who became fascinated. And so when I started, there were the only method to estimate estrogens was a bioassay using spayed mice and castrated mice, in whom we injected the extracts, and then they get an estrus smear if there was enough estrogen, and if we had large number of animals you could get a bioassay, but it was very tedious. Then the first fluorimetric assay was introduced in the late 40s. Fluorimetric.
Yes, so it was only then when it was...
And when I started in the early 50s, there was really no good method. So I started first developing methods for human tissues. But it was not before 1956 that Jim Brown in Edinburgh worked out the first colorimetric method after chromatographic separation of estrone, estradiol and estriol. And we were good friends, so I sent my best assistant who learned the method, came back. I modified it for human tissues, and this was the first ever study when you could estimate, for instance, in fetal tissues, estrogens. And that's how it started. And then...
How did it continue afterwards?
Oh?
How did it continue? Because this happened like 50 years ago.
Yes.
And the developments today, they are enormous. Now they are using...
Sure. And the radioimmunoassays
Yes,
were
very sophisticated methods, even FISH and PCR that are able to...
Yes, sure. And then the mass spectrometric analysis, all this came with me, so with our generation. And this was the big development in the 50s, 60s, maybe even the 70s. It was a very busy time. So at that time we had still the Swedish law of abortion, which was the first in the world where social indications were also considered. It was a shock to the
revolutionary.
Yeah. And so we had in Sweden some 6,000 abortions. And when they have heard from the Medical Research Council that now I have a method for measuring steroids, because then it was followed by progesterone, where we modified a method by Willard Allen. Then they said that we have all these abortions, all that material is wasted. If you would be willing to start a project, the Medical Research Council would most likely favorably consider an application. This is how far they can go when inviting. And so I did it. They started providing support in a really good, big way, which was then the prelude to even bigger support from the Ford Foundation. And of course there was, you know, the abortion. It was always a very sensitive issue, and people mixed up the fact with that the evil is not but the evil is that there is a need for abortion in a society, right? And obviously it is hypocrisy.
The Dutch demonstrated the best this thing. They introduced the abortion by request, and now they have one of the lowest rate of abortion.
Sure.
Because it's not something forbidden, and they have the lowest complication of abortion.
Yes, and also now it is, there has been some progress with contraception, but it is still there are
cases that...
Well, obviously it is not, it can't be controlled when a girl and boy meet and
something happens.
Yeah, these are very, very strong forces. So,
Professor, as the one who maybe saw the best these things, how did medicine evolve in this domain of hormones from the beginnings, from the first steps made in the 50s to where they are today?
Well, it was, of course, even before that, there were some studies. For instance, the Aschheim and Zondek, who discovered the large amounts of estrogen in pregnancy urine. That was in the 20s, 26, 27. Then the bioassay methods, that was the Papa Nicolau test with spayed mice. That was also known, and when I wrote my thesis, I still used it for estimating in the placenta estrogens, which has not been done before. So it was a very rapid development, and it was a great privilege to be part of it, obviously. It was an exciting time, and see how we can progress. And then came the MRC, said they are interested in this. Of course, there were some religious groups in the country which were violently disagreeing, and it didn't help. We said, look, it is not a crime that we are trying to get information from the material, which otherwise would be thrown into the waste basket. If you really want to do something about this, you must go a step further. They didn't like it, of course. Human nature is. And so, the first step was, I remember, that we collected fetal tissues from abortions, and then developed a method for tissue analysis, and to my great surprise we found that when we analyzed the fetal liver tissue, virtually all estrogen